I want to share with you today about scars and scar tissue, the different varieties of scarring that some of you might experience and want to explore deeper, and also what you could do for developing scar tissue or even old scars. So I'll talk a little bit about the physical, the different types of scarring, but also because a lot of my work is rooted in emotions and trauma, that's where the focus is going to be today. So the types of scars that you can develop and the events that can trigger them could be a fall that you had when you were younger or older. It could be from surgery that you elected to have or surgery that you had to have. It can be from scarring from different skin conditions. So psoriasis, eczema, or maybe cystic acne where you get the pitting scarring, or maybe you get some discoloration or pigmentation. It could be sun damage where you get the excessive pigmentation as well. And with pregnancy, it could be scarring from birth trauma, from natural vaginal deliveries, and it can also be from the C-sections. Now, the thing that I want to say about scarring is that, of course, it doesn't cause everybody issues, and you might have scars on your body from a variety of what I explained. Some of them you recognize, yep, I'm not too happy with this. I have these feelings that are a little bit icky, and then other ones that you're completely fine with. So this is really for you to explore the scars that you might not be okay with, that you don't like to look at, you have difficulty touching. Maybe it gives you a queasy feeling. You have avoidant behavior around it. You have an aversion towards it. So you don't like looking at the scar. You've maybe never looked at it. You don't like touching it because it gives you some funny feelings or funny memories. Or so if you get physical therapy and someone goes to work on it or touch it, and all of a sudden it causes a reaction in your body. So you don't like looking at it, you don't like touching it, or maybe you don't like other people touching it. So in my history of being an osteopath, I used to love working on scars. I used to love working on people where I could feel the emotions held in their tissues. And I used to use either hands-on work, manipulation with cracking, or I used to love using acupuncture needles, and I would use them in scar tissue as well. But I think there's a lot that you can do on your own to start to release these scars on a physical level and also on an emotional level. I'll talk a little bit about the scar tissue on a physical level a little bit later. And of course, you're going to have to take responsibility of where your scar's at. And with any of this work on an emotional or physical level, you've got to make sure that you feel safe and comfortable. And it is all about honoring your timing for when you feel ready to dive deeper into this work. So I talked about scars that might happen from a fall when you were younger or older, but let me elaborate on this. This could be a fall that you had when you were 3, 5, 10 years old, or maybe when you were 20 or in your 30s. It is more about what happened around that event. So maybe you've got this scar somewhere on your body and you don't like looking at it. Maybe when you touch it, it gives you these funny feelings that you can't really explain, or when someone else has gone to touch on it or work on it, you've had a reaction. So if you've got a scar like this on your body from a fall, or maybe it's some pigmentation, and you remember what happened, usually the emotion associated with it is, what was the reaction of the people around you? Maybe you didn't have anyone around you to help you. Maybe you had people around you, but they laughed at you and you felt really embarrassed. Maybe you had your parents around you and their reaction was not what you wanted. You didn't receive the support that you wanted from them. So all of a sudden, this scar is not just a physical injury and a way of your body reacting, it holds emotions. And my work is very much about process your emotions, but that's the transformative work, that's that deeper level. I want to create awareness for you by sharing these stories and sharing what I get exposed to. So you might have this cut, this scar, you've got this memory, and it doesn't matter what age you were, but think about, well, what happened? What happened around that time? Who was around me? How did they respond? How did they not respond in the way that I needed? And that's often why when you can touch or look at the scar and you have these feelings, that's that emotion that gets uncomfortable to deal with. And sometimes it gets overwhelming, so we find it easier just to avoid it, not look at it, not touch it, not let anyone else touch it. But I like to dig in. I like to get people to release their emotions. So the other one was scars from surgery. So this could be elective surgery that you've decided to have. And especially when it's elective or say maybe cosmetic surgery, sometimes it can go completely fine and you're really happy with it. But with anything in life, I like people to think about being intentional. So whether or not they want to enroll in a course, they make a decision about moving house, or maybe they're making a decision around surgery, is can you be intentional? Can you explore, why is it that I want to change this in me? Why is it that I want to remove this part from me? Because what I often see on a physical manifestation level, an undesirable physical manifestation, is when people try and do more, and it's almost like it's not enough. And sometimes they can get complications from surgery. And you can get complications from cosmetic surgery as well. You can get scar tissue that doesn't heal the way you thought it would, and it can actually end up looking worse. Elective surgery also goes as far as like moving organs as well for preventative means. That's a whole other topic. But the scar tissue from elective surgery, and if you have some sort of feeling around a scar from elective surgery, is go back to, well, what was my intention? Did I think that this was going to fix everything? And was my body giving me another sign by reacting with this scar tissue that I have issues looking at, touching, or having other people work on? Do I avoid the scar? And if I go back to the time of the event, what was my intention? Now, there are also scars that develop from surgeries, emergency surgeries that have to happen. And these you don't usually have time to have an intention apart from I need to stay alive. So these could be like getting your appendix removed. It could be getting your gallbladder removed. And then there are the surgeries that people are told that they should have. And what I'm thinking of is particularly clients that I've worked with in groups and one-to-one who have had cancer experiences. And a lot of the stuff that we're working on is, oh my gosh, I was operating from a place of fear. And yes, I agree, you've got to do things, and conventional medicine is amazing at doing things. But sometimes they've realized long after that, oh my gosh, I didn't have to have this body part removed, but they just got swept up and they didn't have the ability to process their emotions during this time. So it can be the scars from the surgery where either, yes, you had to have them because of an emergency, and there may be, again, a series of events that were happening in your life at that time that triggered that body part, like your appendix or your gallbladder, to really react where you had to get it removed because it was life-threatening. Think about that. And then there are also the surgeries that had to happen because conventional medicine told you, but now the emotion really behind it is, oh my gosh, did I have to remove this body part? So even though body parts are removed, I still believe the space that they occupy still governs the emotions. And we can't simply remove organs at the same time and believe that everything's fixed, because and I believe that 99%, maybe 95 to 99% of issues are rooted in emotion. If you don't deal with the emotion, then there are many secondary areas for the issue to move on and manifest if you aren't listening to your body. So if you haven't caught on yet, I'm really trying to get you to go back, check in with what was going on in your life at this time of this event. Who was around you? What was going on in your life? Are there deeper messages that perhaps your body was telling you that it's now time to address, and a scar is an opportunity to do this? Okay, so I've covered falls, I've covered surgeries that might have been needed or elective. The other ones are skin and also pregnancy related. So let me cover skin. And I think I talked a little bit about this in my podcast episode, Emotional Botox, is for people who have had acne, severe acne, where they've got pitting scarring. So I experienced acne. That was one of my crisis points that really got me into this emotional work and understanding what was my body trying to tell me. is that some people experience cystic acne that causes pitting scarring or discoloration scarring. I used to experience the discoloration, which would last for months. That got to me, but I did experience some pitting, but over time, maybe because that happened in my 20s, it actually recovered. And there are things that you can actually do for this. But the episode on emotional Botox, long story short, is about, right, well, people get these wrinkles, people get these stress lines from different events in their life, like a divorce or grief that they haven't been able to process. And once they've actually worked on it on an emotional level, they've still got these physical memories. And again, that's where I go back to, what is your intention around wanting to do cosmetic stuff or Botox? And then we see the people who overdo it, and you know that something's wrong on a deeper level. You can just see it in their body. Okay, so if I just circle back to cystic acne and pitting scars, is that, again, some people get teased for their skin. Some people feel very low in their self-esteem having skin issues. Some people are not affected at all. And then you move through this stage where there's stress, there's hormones, there's emotional reasons, you understand, and hopefully you move through it. That's what I did with my skin. That's why I'm doing this work here today and showing up. But then you're reminded of this pitting, scarring, and either you can feel like it's a trophy that I've moved through this, or you don't really want to be reminded of that time. And so this is where people can do things. There's all sorts of stuff out there, like beauty therapists can do the needling. You can have injected it with fillers, with dermatologists or beauty type doctors, aesthetic doctors, cosmetic doctors, derma stamping, all these kind of things. And I'm sure that over time, there's going to be lots of new things that people can do. So there are things that you can do to help pitting scarring go away, improve its appearance. And this is where I say, well, emotions do affect your physical body, but likewise, your physical body and the way it looks and the way you feel about it is going to affect your emotional state and how you show up as well. So it's that old saying of, if you're confident, put your shoulders up, poke your chest out a little bit. If you're depressed, you're probably going to have a sad face on and you're going to slump with your posture. So this is that physical influences emotional state can influence your physical state. And that's a really basic example. So scarring can also happen not just from acne and pimples, but it can happen from other types of skin conditions, whatever you've had. It could be the severe eczema where the skin gets really thickened. It can be psoriasis. Those are the kind of 3 skin conditions that I talk a lot about, but there are many variations of, and of course, people who have autoimmune skin conditions, whatever it might be, we're just focusing on the scarring and the remnants and how you might feel. Okay, so the other one that I believe I covered was birth. So it can be birth trauma from a natural birth where there can be tears, there can be a lot of changes with your genitalia. And not only can that lead to you not wanting to look at that area, not really touching that area, but also with intimacy, that can be a big thing for people to transition and get comfortable with as well, when there's been a lot of emotion held around the way a birth went. Now, this is another huge topic, so I'm not really going to go into depth with it. But initially, I was thinking of just covering C-sections, but of course, you can get scarring, you can get tissue damage elsewhere, particularly when people get grade 3 and 4 tears. It can be that it wasn't stitched or repaired properly at the time. And of course, with scar tissue, different people are going to have different tendencies to how their body repairs. And sometimes the body goes into overdrive with developing scar tissue. I'll talk about that a bit more with the physical aspect. But if I talk about C-sections, again, some people have no issue with having a C-section. It was a voluntary choice. Some people have the ability to just move through with whatever happened. And then some people, a C-section is a result of their plans, their intentions going out the window, and maybe their power being taken away from them. So already with me saying that, perhaps if this is you, you can really think about, okay, well, is my birth experience something for me to process on, for something for me to release on, And often when I'm doing releases with people around birth trauma, there are multiple people involved to release on. There's the doctors, the nurses, the obstetrician, the support staff, the partner, the baby, the younger version of themselves, their family, etc. So many aspects of it. But C-sections are something where I don't know if I've spoken about it in podcasts, but I've definitely spoken it with my groups, is the behind the scenes stuff that people often talk to me about, that I say is the unspoken stuff, is for some women, having a C-section can make them feel like, well, I shouldn't be here because evolutionary in the past, I would have died in childbirth. And this is the amazing thing about conventional medicine and C-sections. They feel like, well, am I really a woman if I couldn't birth a child naturally? So these are the deeper things that I'm often navigating with people, that people feel ashamed to speak about. That's what happens behind the scenes. That's the transformative work. So C-sections, again, people can feel really ashamed. I don't want to look at it. They can't look at themselves in their mirror. And sometimes the body is very different when there's been a couple of natural births or a handful of natural births and then a C-section, because scar tissue can change the physical body in that way. Okay, excuse me, my phone is going off. And I don't edit my podcasts. And I'm on such a roll. So sorry about that. Okay, so the body can change because scar tissue starts to sometimes, and some people put tension on the tissues. So you may not like the way you look, not just the scar, but the way the physical body's responded. And this is where I feel like no matter how old the scar is, you can still work on it. Okay, so yeah, touching it. I really encourage any of the women that I work with, so be it ones that I've worked with in the online space who have had babies, or especially I used to work with a lot more in the osteo world, is that I wanted them to be able to connect with the scar as soon as possible. So this might be looking at it whilst it's healing, when you can take the dressings off and feel all the emotion, because there is so much emotion to process and release after birth, let alone connecting with the scar. I want them to be able to touch it as soon as possible. I want them to be able to, when it's healed, as long as there's no complications, and this timeline is going to be different for everyone, is to get in there and massage it and to be able to sit with the discomfort. So I can feel myself already going off into talking about the physical. So maybe I will start again a little bit and go into that. But we've talked a lot. I've talked a lot about the types of scarring that you can have, and hopefully opened your mind a little bit to the different types of scarring. And then we've talked about the emotions and the events, the intention behind surgery. And if you've got emotion held in scar tissue, usually it's because the ways that you can work out whether or not you have emotion behind the scar tissue is, do you have difficulty looking at that scar? Do you always try and cover it up? Do you not like the way you look because of that scar? Do you have issues with touching the scar, that it gives you queasy feelings, your nervous system reacts? And if anyone was to say, hey, let's work on that scar, or maybe they've touched it in a massage or physical therapy session and your body's reacted and gone, get away, or maybe you've like pushed their hand away, you've got that stronger reaction. Those are the reasons that I would start to look at when someone's ready and they want to do the deeper transformative work, is let's do the emotional work behind these scars. Okay. Now I'll get into the physical aspect. I want you to take this with a grain of salt, because this is varied depending on how quickly someone heals. Where is the scar on the timeline? Have you just had an operation? Have you just developed fresh scar tissue? Or are you 2 years, 10 years, or 20 years down the track? If I know that a client of mine is going to have surgery, I talk to them about the scar. I actually try and prep them as much as possible to be intentional behind any decision that they make. Unfortunately, I often get people after the fact, but that's okay. It's never too late. But I do work with people where I'm prepping them for surgery, and I want to talk to them about loving and nurturing and looking after that scar, because in the long run, I don't want them to have to deal with emotions 10 or 20 years down the track. And how can we get this physical scar tissue as flexible and as nice looking as possible so that it doesn't affect you on an emotional level in the future? Okay, so let's start with fresh scars. And it's going to depend on what layer the scar is in. Is it in the superficial level? Is it deeper? Did you have to have muscle cut? Did you have to have organs removed? Is that obviously I would want for you to wait until you heal. Everybody has different healing capacities. Medications can influence it. Your general health can influence it. But yeah, this is where I'm getting a little bit hesitant as I'm describing it, because it really depends. What is the level of your scar? But once it started to heal, and this is where I would look at people's scars for them, because sometimes they get infections as well and it wasn't the right time, is during that healing period, if you don't have to have a dressing on it, I would encourage you to look at the scar. Okay, connect with it, sit with those uncomfortable feelings as long as you feel safe. Sometimes you might need that work facilitated. Once it started to heal, I'd love for you to just touch it. It might be placing your hand on that scar and just notice the feelings that you have come up. Now, I always talk about challenges being opportunities, is that a scar can bring up so many other emotions that you also haven't dealt with. Okay, so looking at it, then touching it, it might just be placing a hand on it. Then you might do some, when it's more healed, and as the scar tissue is laying down, you might do some gentle rubbing and massage to actually increase the flexibility of the scar. So if you're watching the video version of this, if you imagine you've got muscle fibers, and I've just got my fingers interlocked and kind of representing the muscle fibers, is if you have a tear in the muscle fibers, then scar tissue doesn't know how to lay down to be nice and functional and nice and stretchy. It'll just lay down haphazardly to try and fill the gap. So that means it can go crossways, this way, that way, and then it just becomes very inflexible in the area that it has developed. So I do feel like the earlier you can get onto scar tissue, the better. It's different how long it takes to develop and solidify depending on what level the scar tissue is developing, like the skin, the muscle, or deeper, and our different tendencies to lay down scar tissue. Some is a little bit more excessive, which is where people get keloid scarring. But you want to try and create flexibility in that scar. And I think that sometimes, say, for example, when someone tears the muscle and they don't get support to move it at the right time, they can actually cause more adhesions, more restriction. And let me use an example that's coming to my mind. Is a long time ago when I sprained my ankle, I used to just roll them, but one day I sprained my ankle and I tore it and it swelled up and it was quite uncomfortable. And I was an osteopath at this time, but I wasn't a very good patient for myself. And out of fear, I actually didn't do a lot with it. I became overprotective with it. And after about 6 weeks, I couldn't sit cross-legged. I couldn't sit with my heels under my bum in yoga. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is scar tissue that's restricted because it's not soft and flexy. And I was very grateful. For about however many weeks or months later, I rolled that ankle again, I sprained it again, and I definitely tore something. I felt it pop. But this time, once I went through that initial healing period, when I felt it was the right time, I started to sit with my legs crossed, even though it was uncomfortable. I started to sit with my heels under my bum because I must have torn that scar tissue, maybe torn a little bit more ligament in there. But now I wanted to tell the scar tissue, this is the flexibility and range of motion I need in my body. And so I'm going to work with you as you're laying down to make sure that you don't become restrictive with my movement. So that's an example for me. So yeah, if you can lightly massage it. And I know there's all these fancy oils out there. I'm not a big fan of fragrance oils. I would just use something really basic. And then there are also times when you shouldn't use oils and actually just do dry stuff to really stretch and stimulate the blood flow. Actually, that's the other thing that I forgot to mention, is that sometimes your scar, depending on the level it's being cut at, you may not connect with it because it feels numb. But I want you to know that numb's still a sensation, and we can stimulate sensation as long as we provide the stimulation for it. So you can start to do deeper massage, and this is probably where I would prefer that you start to work with someone and be guided with someone about how deep do you go. I find that a lot of people don't actually go deep enough because of the queasy feelings and the emotions that are stuck in this scar tissue. But you can really get into scar tissue once everything's well healed to manipulate it and get it to be soft, particularly with C-section scars. This is where you can really influence how the body might look, so that there's no like puckering happening, or the pooch forming, the little pooch people call them, or the pouch that pops out because of the scar tissue. So it's about getting everything to soften and manipulating that scar, especially if you're in the early stages. But I have worked on scars that are decades old and still had a lot of success. But usually what I would do is get needles, like pick the skin up, the scar up, and I would needle underneath it. A lot of the time it was numb, so people wouldn't feel much. And it was actually a bit of a celebration when they started to feel sharpness go on in there. But I would have to take scar work slowly for some people because the amount of emotion that was held there, and it wasn't unusual for people to burst into tears or feel very sick having a scar worked on. But as long as they felt safe with me, we could move through it within a few sessions and then have them connecting in with their scar. It was really fascinating. So if you've got a really old scar, I would say that you're probably safer working on the tissue. You want to make sure that this is scar tissue. If you're someone that develops keloid scars, I actually used to recommend a product called Cica Care Gel, CICA. It's a sheet of silicone. I think it's like $80 to $100 for a small sheet, but you can actually reuse it. And that is pretty amazing at working on old keloid scars. Again, the earlier you can use it, the better. But it can really soften up the scar tissue. Supplements wise, usually having good vitamin C and zinc is really good for healthy collagen laydown. But again, just remember the physical aspect of stretching a scar, softening a scar, and allowing it to become flexible. And even if it's really old, if you're willing to put the work and dedication and the repetition in, you can start to soften and get a scar to be more flexible. And ultimately, what you can do is release a lot of trauma and emotions from that scar and what it represents for you, what it means for you. And that's the really exciting stuff for me. So Cica Care Gel, vitamin C, zinc, especially for early scar tissue development, physical work, which can be simple massage type stuff, friction work. I get people to stretch and twist the scar, stretch it horizontally, stretch it longitudinally along the scar, and really connecting in with it. You might have little scars that is just from a very minor cut, but it's very lumpy tissue. And again, if you go in there intentionally, and I'd say a couple of times a day on a regular basis for weeks or sometimes months, and you really want to, weeks to months, if you really want to get that scar tissue softened, then you've, like with anything, you've got to put the persistence, the commitment, and the dedication behind it. And my deeper message is scars hold emotion. If you have no issues with your scars, then you probably aren't going to want to work on them. But if you're on the train of this, emotions, physical body is, well, your body on all levels, not just physical, is a manifestation of your emotional state. Perhaps scars is something that you can start exploring. I hope this has helped you. I always love to hear from you if it has. And let's see what your scars, pigmentation, what do they have to reveal? What was going on in your life at that time? Who was around you? What support did you have? What was your intention behind that time that you decided to have surgery or not? Where were you at? What emotions could you process? And by connecting in with your scar, looking at it, feeling it, touching it, massaging it, what is it that you could release from your body?